Thank you. All right. And all right, everybody, here we go.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Jennie MacFarland. I am the conservation biologist for the Tucson Audubon Society. So I am on staff for the Tucson Audubon Society, and I absolutely love the Southeast Arizona Birding Festival. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. Share. Okay. All right, so welcome. Can everyone see that okay? The Arizona's Most Wanted Birds?
I've got it. I'm assuming everybody else does. I'm
all right,
going
great,
to
excellent.
mute myself.
Welcome. So I love the Southeast Arizona Birding Festival. I have been at Tucson Audubon Society for 10 years now, and I have been involved with the festival, and it's early on in a small capacity, but I have been involved in, I think, pretty much every festival Tucson Audubon has had. And this is such a nice time of year. August is just fantastic. The monsoon rains in a normal year, like this year, when the monsoon rains come, this whole area turns just so beautiful. So Arizona's Most Wanted Birds is our topic of discussion today. And this talk will have lots of photos, lots of maps, some audio, lots of audio, and some video even. So birds are incredibly dynamic, and photos just don't cut it. We gotta use some audio and video as well. So I have here, this background here of this slide is Florida Canyon. This is what a lot of Southeast Arizona looks like through most of July and through August, when our summer monsoon rains come and we have our second spring, or in the case of this year, our first spring, since the spring months this year were very, very dry. We're just coming out of a very serious drought that really affected a lot of birds and wildlife and vegetation. And but this photo in the back here of Florida Canyon at the base of the Santa Rita Mountains is what everything looks like now and what it should look like during a typical monsoon year. Okay. So we are going to be focusing on the birds themselves that are the most desirable, the most wanted birds of Southeast Arizona. But I'd like to touch on a little bit about why this area is so good for birds. And this map really brings that to light. So this is a GIS heat map. So this is made using modern mapping technologies, where they took the ranges, the species richness of overlapping ranges of 591 bird species in the lower 48 states of the United States. And where there was the most species present in a spot had the hottest color. So red is the highest diversity. So what you're seeing here is pretty darn expected. The coastlines really light up. The Gulf Coast, the Atlantic Coast, and the Pacific Coast really line up because the coasts are always spots of high diversity. You get birds coming in from the ocean, things blowing in on storms. So those are really quite good. But the other really big red spot in the entire lower 48 states is right here in Southeast Arizona and a very small part of Southwest New Mexico, which is ecologically very similar to Southeast Arizona. So this right here gives us a very good reason, very good hint as to why this festival gets so many great birds and why Arizona has some of the most wanted birds by birders in Southeast Arizona. And we also have a huge diversity of habitats within this area, and we're going to talk about that right now. So there's a lot going on here in Southeast Arizona. It's an incredibly dynamic place, and the more time you spend in Southeast Arizona, the more you get familiar with this concept, where there's a lot going on. And one of the major forces at work that creates diversity is our deserts. So we are iconically a desert state, Arizona, with the saguaro blossom as the state flower and cactus wren as the state bird. And then, the sweeping vistas of, saguaro covered mountains and the Grand Canyon. We're very much famously a desert state. And it's not just Sonoran Desert. We have 3 different deserts that occur in southern Arizona that meet and overlap. There's a lot of ecological overlap, and this is going to be a big theme throughout this talk. It's a big theme in this region. So we have 3 different deserts. We have the Mojave coming in from the northwest, and this is a desert that brings us iconically things like Joshua trees and Bendire's thrashers. These are very much species of Mojave Desert. From the east coming in, we have Chihuahuan Desert. So this is more the desert you see in New Mexico when you're driving through New Mexico or east of the Chiricahua Mountains in Southeast Arizona. And this brings us things like scale quail and Lucifer hummingbirds. This is very much Chihuahuan species that overlap and occur here in Southeast Arizona. And then absolutely iconically and dominantly, our desert type is Sonoran. So this, of course, is the iconic saguaro cactus and, mesquite trees, and just so many birds are associated with Sonoran Desert. And we'll talk about those in detail. But there's another larger continental level force that is happening here in Southeast Arizona. They're happening throughout the entire American West, but they really become very important and they meet here in Southeast Arizona. So we have this Rocky Mountain influence coming in from the north. And this is literally, we're kind of on the very furthest southern edge of Rocky Mountain influence. So this is things like western tanagers or rufous hummingbirds. So a lot of the Rocky Mountain influence we feel are migratory birds that are coming through Southeast Arizona to get to those Rocky Mountain breeding ranges. So we have a lot of this, and it's also often called by biologists called Nearctic. So it's this Nearctic force coming in from the north, which can be thought of as sort of a Rocky Mountain influence. And then very, very importantly, critically for this area, uniquely for the United States, we do have the Sierra Madre Occidental. So that's a term you're going to hear a lot in this talk. So Sierra Madre Occidental force coming in from the south. And what does that mean exactly? One of the strange things, if you've never heard this term, you're about to learn about it right now. So the Sierra Madre Occidental is literally a chain of mountain ranges, and it's in West Mexico. This yellow circle is circling most of it. And it's often known as the Sierra Madre Occidental Archipelago, is a term you'll hear thrown around about what we call sky islands. So these are mountain ranges that cluster together and create this really dominant ecological feature coming up the western part of Mexico. And it can be thought of almost like Mexico's Rocky Mountains. So the Rocky Mountains are a big collection of smaller mountain ranges. And this is what's happening in the Sierra Madre too. These are distinct little mountain ranges that each have their own name. They're distinct ranges, but they create this big cluster. And if we were talking about islands out in the ocean, like Hawaii, this is known as an archipelago, right? A collection of islands that are near each other. So this geographic term is being used metaphorically on mountain ranges in West Mexico that extend into Southeast Arizona. So what's happening here is there's this huge chain of mountain ranges, the Sierra Madre Occidental. It doesn't end at the US Mexico border. It goes slightly into the United States right here in Southeast Arizona and a tiny bit in Southwest New Mexico. And this is a huge, huge factor into why we have so many birds here in Southeast Arizona that can be found nowhere else in the United States, but right here in the Southeast Arizona. So birds like Elegant Trogon are an excellent example of iconic species within West Mexico that are commonly known as Sierra Madre species. So these are species that are closely associated with this chain of mountain ranges, which really has its own specific ecological features and habitats. And Elegant Trogons are a classic bird of this habitat type. And just like out in the ocean where species can hop or can move themselves, their populations from island to island, this happens here on these sky islands too, these mountain ranges, which are metaphorically known as sky islands, these pockets of high elevation habitat surrounded by a sea of grassland or desert. And species like Elegant Trogons will literally island hop up into Southeast Arizona. And this contributes to a lot of what you see out here. As birders, as bird lovers, we can see how this affects a lot of the bird species around here, but it has a huge influence on the plants that we have in this region, and reptiles, herps, mammals, snakes, and as well as, even things like javelina. This is part of the reason we have coatis here in Southeast Arizona, is they're coming up this the Sierra Madre pathway, this island hopping pathway up from West Mexico. So here it is a little more in depth, more in the region that we are in right now. So this red circle is sort of encompassing this border area of Southeast Arizona into Southwest New Mexico and then Northwest Mexico. So you can see here, this map really nicely shows some of these mountain ranges south of the border. And this right here is the Santa Rita Mountains. So right near where many of us are at the moment in Southeast Arizona. And here's the Catalinas, just north of Tucson. the Santa Ritas to the south of Tucson, near Green Valley, home to the famous Madera Canyon. But all these mountain ranges, like the Chiricahua Mountains, the Pinaleños, the Galleros, the Huachucas, these are all part of this absolute furthest north extension of the Sierra Madre Occidental chain of mountain ranges. Now, of course, there's mountains north of the Pinaleños in southern Arizona, but these ecologically are not part of the Sierra Madre. Then you start hitting the Colorado Plateau, which this map very helpfully points out, and now you're in a totally different habitat type, and it really has a huge impact on everything that can occur there. And this is going to be a huge theme in maps that we'll be looking at the rest of this talk. So this arrow indicating that these mountain ranges, the furthest north extent of the Sierra Madre, is literally pulling species up, as it's the furthest north extent ecological habitat of this region of West Mexico. So this is probably the biggest reason that this area is so good for birding and has some of Arizona's most wanted birds, or here in Southeast Arizona. Now, we also have a huge diversity of habitats, and diverse habitats create diverse ecosystems and then creates sort of diversity of the animals within those ecosystems. So we do have desert out here, our mountains, also known as sky islands, and this is pretty exclusively used in Southeast Arizona for the most part. Riparian zones, which themselves can be quite diverse. We have, actual lowland rivers that flow through Southeast Arizona. Don't flow as well as they used to, but this time of year they flow okay. The Santa Cruz River, the San Pedro River, but we also have smaller riparian zones, so sort of upland riparian zones, creeks that flow through canyons and through drainages in the mountain ranges, or even washes through the Sonoran Desert. These are all incredibly important examples of riparian zones in Southeast Arizona. And then we have grassland. A lot of grassland habitat is in Southeast Arizona, and you wouldn't necessarily think of Southeast Arizona as a place that has lots of beautiful grassland, but there are pockets of absolutely stunning grassland near Sonoyta. There's that Las Ciénegas National Conservation Area. Closer to Patagonia is the San Rafael grasslands. So actually an incredibly beautiful grasslands. And I can't help but mention one of my favorite trivia tidbits is that the movie Oklahoma was actually filmed in Southeast Arizona. That's how lovely some of our grassland habitats are. So there's so many amazing bird species of Southeast Arizona that it actually made it kind of difficult to choose which ones to talk about, because there's actually so many really great ones. So I decided to really go with what I thought were the top choices, both in terms of desirability, as well as just like how awesome they are. And I organized this by habitat type. I feel like this is a really good way to think about birds when you're out birding is what is likely to occur in this habitat type that I am standing in right now. So I'm going I organize it somewhat elevationally, but this is the Sonoran Desert. So there, of course, are the influences of the other deserts like Mojave and Chihuahuan, but Sonoran Desert really is the primary desert in Southeast Arizona. It's certainly the most iconic and the most widespread. So Sonoran Desert is amazing. As someone who's grown up in the Sonoran Desert, I feel like this is an amazing, we have someone come through, that this is absolutely a stunning habitat type. And of course, the iconic saguaro cactus. And it has distinctive bird species as well as really distinctive plants like saguaro and cholla, but also really distinctive mammals and amazing herps, lizards and snakes. Someone is not muted. So things like Gila monsters are distinctive species of Sonoran Desert. So really, really beautiful habitat type. And it has some absolutely charismatic bird species. So we have here the elf owl. Elf owl is an amazing bird. They're so cool. We do elf owl surveys here in Southeast Arizona. Now, most of our slides from now on are going to work this way. We'll have photos of the birds, this map down here, and this is literally a range map. And if you're not familiar with range maps, they can be found in birding field guides, and they are showing the distribution of birds geographically. So they're often color coded, and this is a good one to start with because it has all 4 colors on it. So how these ones tend to work is the orange is going to be breeding territory. So many birds are migratory and will travel to a location in order to nest and then leave again. So these are going to be breeding range, but not year round. Yellow is the migration, so areas that birds pass through to get to the breeding grounds or to the wintering grounds. Blue is wintering grounds, And the purple indicates year-round residents. So these are birds that just sort of stay within that region throughout the entire year. So this is a great map to start with, and it's just great because it shows us what's going on with elf owls. So they do occur in southern Arizona. They're very Sonoran Desert associated. We're going to talk about that, but they're not really here year-round. It's always a big event for people in southern Arizona when the elf owls first arrive. It is usually in the spring, March, usually into April. They migrate through these regions. They do occur in certain portions of West Texas as well, like the Big Bend area. There is a resident population, a separate population in Baja that stays year-round, and then some of them are migratory birds will winter in West Mexico. So they're really cool birds. They are absolutely the smallest owl in the world. They are teeny tiny, very small owls. And when you see them in person, they are so small, but they're actually very fierce predators. It's just they're fierce predators of tiny prey. So they take out large insects. They like scorpions, things like scorpions, beetles, grasshoppers, small lizards, and very, very small mammals sometimes. And even small birds are really not super safe around them. But they're very fierce predators, and they are very commonly associated with Sonoran Desert, but they will readily utilize Sky Island habitat as well. So this is going to happen on a few of our slides where species are not strictly tied to one type of habitat. I have had elf owls up into oak woodland regularly, so like in the base of Madera Canyon, up through Madera Canyon, and they do quite well along creeks and drainages in the Sky Islands as well. But Sonoran Desert is really what they're really famous for. This is where most people encounter them, and that's where most of sort of their suburban interface occurs. So let's listen to this call to elk. It's such a funny sound. They are named for their call. Now, I think the name works particularly well for their size too. They're so small, but it's that elfin sort of ethereal calling laughter sound that gives them their name. Can someone let me know, did that sound come through? Did everyone hear that okay? If not, definitely Tina break through and let me know. It should have come through. All right, so gilded flicker is another top bird that people who live in the Tucson area may sort of undervalue the rarity of this species, because if you're in really good Sonoran Desert habitat, they're actually not that rare. I mean, they're sort of relatively common in good habitat, but geographically they're incredibly rare. So this is a range map showing that they are pretty much exclusively restricted to Sonoran Desert habitat in little bits of California into through Baja, Sonoran Desert, Southeast Arizona, Southwest Arizona, and down into just a little bit of coastal Mexico. So they're very, very restricted, incredibly tied to saguaros. Unlike the elf owl, these guys are pretty darn tied to saguaros. They don't have a whole lot of wiggle room. And they are a little bit smaller than northern flicker. They were first split from northern flicker in 1995. So quite a recent, relatively recent split. And when you're out here and you see all this lovely gold, this gilded gold in the wings and in the rectrices of the tail, this is a pretty good indication you're looking at a gilded flicker, especially if it's in Sonoran Desert habitat in a saguaro nest in the spring or summer. It's good, all very good clues that point to gilded flicker. But there's other things you can look at too. And one of the most reliable field features is the cinnamon cap. So the cinnamon cap extending all the way towards the back of the head. This is quite a different feature than you would see on a northern flicker, where they do have cinnamon forehead, but then they have mostly a gray crown. So really distinctive feature there. Let's listen to some gilded flicker. You've probably heard that in the desert. You've hiked around here and heard that. I feel like it's a pretty common sound, especially in the spring. You have heard gilded flickers out in the desert. It's such a great sound that they do. Okay. So Gila woodpecker. This is pronounced Gila. It's a Spanish word. Now this is a bird that if you live in Tucson, you are extremely familiar with Gila woodpeckers. They're pretty abundant within their distribution. They do very well in urban Tucson. They're very comfortable in people's yards. In the spring, they get on people's like AC units and just bang away. So locals feel like these guys are just absolutely everywhere. And they do quite well in this habitat, but they are also incredibly tied to Sonoran Desert and saguaro cacti. And you can also sometimes find them in riparian zones. I frequently find them along the Santa Cruz River, using more riparian zones. But they are incredibly abundant, but geographically very, very rare. So visiting birders from anywhere, pretty much anywhere outside of Arizona, would never have encountered Gila woodpeckers. And it's one of the most asked for birds when people come visit us at the Tucson Audubon Nature Shop is, where can I find a Gila woodpecker? I'm like, oh, just look out the window. There's one that comes in the front yard here of the nature shop. So it's a really abundant bird in right habitat, but the right habitat is pretty darn restricted. A very distinctive sound. That laughing, rattling call is the Gila. So pretty darn distinctive sound. Now, desert purple martins are one I could not help but talk about. They're incredibly Sonoran Desert tied. Now, they are not their own species. This is the only time I'm going to really talk about a subspecies. This is a really cool bird, and I have to admit, I am a bit biased towards them. I really like desert purple martins, and they are incredibly tied to Sonoran Desert and saguaro cacti as well. So these are secondary nesters where they will use woodpecker holes created by either Gila woodpeckers, gilded flickers, these large woodpeckers that create holes in saguaro cacti, get used by other birds when the woodpeckers are done with them. And desert purple martins are one of those birds that will utilize these holes. They're incredibly tied to the monsoons. They're really, really cool. And they are a distinct, separate subspecies from the purple martins that many of you may be familiar that are very popular, occurring in the eastern half of the United States, as well as there's a third subspecies that you can find in the forests of the West. So up near Flagstaff, all sort of along the Pacific coast, up to like Seattle, and a little bit into British Columbia. That's a third subspecies. But this one, the Hesperia desert purple martin, is so cool, so charismatic. And right now, Tucson Audubon Society is currently investigating this little known and fascinating subspecies. I think they are just absolutely cool. And I am heading up that investigation, and it has been so much fun. Now, this range map is really interesting too to look at. So the blue is the winter. So these are birds that winter in South America. They're very long distance migrants. They are swallows. They are the largest swallows in North America. They will migrate through Central America, through Cuba, and then they nest in, this is the dominant subspecies, the eastern subspecies of purple martin. And there's a little patch here of desert purple martin here in Arizona. And then the rest, the arboricola, the western forest martin, will nest in these coastal areas and a little bit in sort of above the rim, as we say, in Arizona. But they're very, very cool birds. And we have been doing a lot of work with them. Now, when you study purple martins in the eastern United States, they will nest primarily in human-made cavities. So people will lower those cavities, literally open a little nest box door and see what's going on inside the nest. That is not possible when they're nesting in a saguaro cactus 25 to 30 feet above the ground. So this is what we have been doing. This is Olia Phillips here, who works at Tucson Audubon Society. And she is using a long pole with a wireless endoscope camera to see inside of a saguaro, to see what's going on with these nesting birds inside of a saguaro cavity. So there's this purple martin flying in. It's got some difficulty, but it's well worth the effort of getting good at this. And Oli and I both have gotten pretty good at this. And this year we have volunteers doing this as well. And these are some of the sights we see inside of these saguaro cavities. Here's a mama martin with her eggs. Here's some very young babies, little pink babies. And this is all time for the monsoon. They don't even start nesting until July when the rains come. These are some young that are looking a lot cuter, looking more like purple martins. And then this is one that probably fledged the next day, getting very close to being ready to fledge. So they're very cool birds. And this is also our first video break. So I do have videos that I want to show, and I couldn't figure out how to embed them. So here they are. So sorry about this problem. Okay. Oh no, this is my purple martin video. Okay. So if you go to our website here, the Tucson Audubon website, we really putting so much emphasis on this. It's such a cool project. If you go to our website, you can see this really, a lot of information about this project. There's really fun videos. And you can see it's just kind of dynamic. These birds are, they're hanging out on the saguaro. It's so different from other purple martins. This is a young male. And if you look here on the left, put their head out a little bit more. It's talking to a female in her nest. There she is looking out of her nest in fall. Male serenading a female inside the cavity. They're such cool birds. Yeah, they're very, very fun. So photos don't do purple martins justice. You got to kind of hear them and see them flying around. Now, another very charismatic, I think they're great. Rufous winged sparrow is super, super range restricted. When people visit from out of state, this is often at the top of the list of birds that they want to see as bird watchers. And because they're extremely range restricted. I mean, look at this range map. They're in a little bit, even throughout the world, they're pretty range restricted. They're not in that much space in Mexico, and then they come up into Southeast Arizona. And they are one of the last bird species described by Western science in the United States. So just incredibly range restricted. You have to be in the right place, the right habitat. They're not that rare. They're relatively abundant in the right habitat, but they also are very incognito when conditions are not good. So they're very tied to Sonoran Desert, as well as sort of scrubland and grassland, edges of Sonoran Desert. And they're very rainfall sensitive. They don't make a lot of noise unless it is raining or is about to rain or has rained quite a lot. So they're very restricted to their breeding behavior by moisture conditions. So pretty distinctive sound. This is definitely a sound you'll hear around sort of like the face of Madera Canyon, that grassland habitat, or throughout any sort of scrub grassland habitat in Santa Cruz County. Definitely pretty darn restricted, but and then we'll sometimes come into feeders. I haven't every now and then seen them at feeders in like Patton Center or in like the base of Madera Canyon, but they're really very cool birds. Definitely one of the most wanted. Now, when I started going through like the iconic birds of Sonoran Desert, I got so many, I felt like it was like too many. It would take a whole talk. So then I did a slide of the Sonoran Desert suite. And even then, this leaves a lot of really good birds out. But we have, of course, our phainopepla, which is many people call sort of the black cardinal. Here is one that people often describe. I saw a black cardinal, and this is a phainopepla. The males are shiny black. The females are a matte gray. They are very fascinating birds. I could do a whole talk on them too. They're very tied with desert mistletoe and have a very interesting migration pattern, but very much Sonoran Desert bird. This is a Pyroloxia. So this is a sometimes called desert cardinal. It is a cousin of the cardinal. It's related to northern cardinals. But this is a distinct species, Pyroloxia, and it has this lovely red, it's a male. So they're primarily silvery gray with some pretty bright patches of red at the crown, face, and on the breast, and in the wings too, with this distinctive yellow bill, very much Sonoran Desert type bird. Of course, our verdin. That's another one where if you live in Tucson, you've seen verdins a lot, or heard them certainly, but they're actually pretty tied to Sonoran Desert, and it's one that visiting birders really do want to see a lot. Harris's hawk is one that you can find in certain spots of Southeast Arizona, and very cool, very dynamic. The population that occurs here in the Sonoran Desert is the only raptor in the world that operates cooperatively. So they operate in family groups, kind of like a wolf pack, often known as the wolf pack of the sky. They're very cool cooperative hunters as well as cooperative breeders. They're very cool, very, very cool hawks. You may well see them during the festival. Greater roadrunner, which is not only in Arizona, but very desert tied. So this is, throughout southern Arizona into New Mexico and into Texas. But greater roadrunner, I would say, is one of the birds people ask me about the most. Where can I find greater roadrunner? And the answer is wherever they want to be, because they are so mobile that it's hard to pin down any one good spot. So anywhere that's sort of lower elevation, grassland into sort of scrub, can have greater roadrunners. And then, of course, our iconic Sonoran Desert hummingbird, the Costa's hummingbird, here on the bottom right. So beautiful little purple-faced male, pretty small hummingbird with a really distinctive voice. So really cool. And this is leaving out so many birds. It's just, there's so many great birds of Sonoran Desert. So moving on to our next habitat type, we do have riparian rivers and creeks. So this is, riparian is a term you hear a lot here in the arid west of these creeks, streams, rivers, washes sometimes, any sort of waterway is a riparian zone. They're very important for bird migration. They provide a lot of support along the way as birds migrate. And over 90% of birds will use riparian zones at some point in their breeding cycle. They're incredibly important for nesting or refuge during times of drought. Desert species will go get, if there's drought in the desert zones, they'll go into riparian zones as like a refuge to find food and shelter. And it is a vanishing habitat here in the arid Southwest. Nearly none of our riparian zones are sort of wild or in their original state. And many of them are just gone, frankly, just destroyed and vanished. And the ones that do remain are heavily altered by human activity. So you got to go to specific spots to see some of these birds that are riparian tied, but greyhawk is a classic example. So throughout their entire range, you can see this has quite a large range into Mexico and Central America. But so throughout this whole range to the southern part of the range, they are pretty varied in their habitat types. But here in Arizona, as well as when they're in South Texas, these Arizona ones are pretty tied to riparian zones. So you're going to find them along rivers, places like the Santa Cruz River, San Pedro River, but also Sky Island creeks can have greyhawks too. So you can find them sometimes in places like Miller Creek in the Huachucas. So they're definitely tied with waterways here in Southeast Arizona. They're not always low elevation. And reptiles are their primary prey. And this has been verified with camera studies, but very cool. They primarily eat lizards and snakes. They really go for those reptiles. And let's listen to their call. Pretty loud. Can do it again. Those are chats in the background. Common sound out here of our riparian zones. They're pretty loud, very distinctive, mournful cry whistle that you'll hear in these waterways. There it is again. So pretty distinctive, and they're kind of small for a buteo. They're relatively small hawk, but they have a really loud voice. And the distinctive white and black barring in the tail, that's why I have two photos here. And then of course it is lovely, very fine, dark gray and light gray barring on the front of their breast. Very cool birds with a really distinctive yellow bill and yellow feet as well. Violet-crowned hummingbird is one that I always think of as being very riparian tied. But this is not going to be so much low elevation riparian like the greyhawks or some of these other riparian species, but sort of mid elevation to high elevation riparian. So they're really beautiful hummingbirds. They have a bright white underparts, make them very distinctive here in the US, almost like a pure bright white throat and belly. Both males and females have this reddish bill with a black tip and the purple crown on top of the head. And they're fairly common in good habitat in Mexico, but they're very restricted in the US, and they do seem to prefer creeks and streams. And I feel like at the moment anyway, they're expanding into some other mountain ranges besides some of the better known areas. So you see just a tiny part of their range comes into the US here in Southeast Arizona and Southwest New Mexico. Now, a really good spot, a famous spot to go see violet-crowned hummingbirds is the Tucson Audubon's Patton Center for Hummingbirds, and this is in Patagonia. And if you are on any festival field trips that go anywhere near Patagonia, I would bet money that you'll stop at Patton Center because it's very good. It's the most reliable spot for this species in the US, and it has tons of native plant landscaping as well as feeders for other birds too. So a really cool spot. Lucy's warblers is one that I feel like is really sort of underappreciated as a rare bird. They're pretty restricted geographically. They do go into California a little bit and sort of through the lower elevation habitat up into Utah, but they're sort of, I think, for me, most associated with southern Arizona and mesquite habitat. They're incredibly mesquite associated, which is a habitat type that is not that common and disappearing rapidly. This is one that disappears when rivers disappear because of groundwater pumping or reduction in water tables. The mesquite bosque will die off, or it gets cleared for agriculture or urban areas. So it's a vanishing habitat. And Tucson Audubon has had a very cool nest box program centering around these birds, where we invented a nest box that for these species, it did all sorts of different types in a big experiment and found the one they like best. And if you want to find out more about that, if you just Google Tucson Audubon Lucy's warblers, you'll find a lot more info about that. But there was a very focal species for us, and they're really cool. Let's listen to their song. Really cheerful song, definitely a sound of spring. This is one of the earliest migrants to arrive in the spring. They usually come in March, and they are the sort of lowest elevation, the only Sonoran desert nesting warbler that we have here in Arizona. Very, very cool, very charismatic birds, and definitely an icon of riparian zones in Southeast Arizona. Here's another one that I think is easily overlooked. They're not that flashy, but they're very cool. So this is the northern beardless tarantulet. The joke you'll hear frequently among the birding guides is its name is larger than the bird is. It's a very small flycatcher, very, very tiny. It is the only of the Elaninae kind of group of flycatchers that's here in the US. And this is a group of flycatchers that's relatively abundant in through the tropics, so through Mexico and through Central and South America. But the only representative of that family is here in Southeast Arizona. And from this range map, you can see it's barely here in Southeast Arizona. Barely makes its range into the US here in Southeast Arizona. And they're really associated with riparian. And this sound is one that you will hear this time of year in sort of any lush riparian habitat, mesquite bosques, along rivers, any of those, even kind of some foothills areas of the Sky Island. So like the creek at like along Proctor Road at the base of Madera Canyon can get tarantulet, northern beardless tarantulet. Very cool birds, and their name literally means little tyrant, tarantulet, little tyrant, because they're so aggressive towards potential threats. And they're little pint-sized, fierce flycatchers, and they're very cool. I hope everyone at some point gets a chance to hear and see a northern beardless tarantulet. Now this is a bird that is very desirable. So Ferruginous Pygmy Owl, they are pretty well known for being visible in certain parts of extreme South Texas, but there is a population that occurs in Southern Arizona as well. And they're very, the group that we have here, the subgroup we have here, is very closely associated with high quality Sonoran desert washes. So they like to nest in saguaros, and they will bring this. He's got a lizard here. This guy's bringing a lizard into a saguaro nest, and they're pretty rare here in Southern Arizona. But there are some birds on public lands that you can go see, and they were previously listed on the Endangered Species Act. And everyone should be very sensitive of these birds. If you do go look for them, they nest in the spring. So by this time of year, they're still around. They're resident. They're still around. But they've wrapped up breeding by now. So if you do want to go see these birds, look for Ferruginous Pygmy Owls here in Southern Arizona. I would definitely suggest you do it not in the spring, but during like this time of year through winter is a really good time, but early winter, because by late winter, they're starting to set up breeding territories for the spring. So they're very associated with desert riparian, fierce hunter of small prey, and they are daytime owls. So they're around during the day and will be mobbed by gnatcatchers. Little small birds will mob them. So that's a good way to find them. But you can see the species Ferruginous Pygmy Owl is pretty abundant through South America, parts of Central America and Mexico. But there is a population that comes up into Arizona right here. And I do have a video of these guys too. Let's see if I can. Yeah, so we have a video. Here we go. Do a little video break again. I do have this one queued up. Here we go. Okay. Come on. They're just cool. They're pretty large feet for such a small bird. Pygmy owls have these enormous feet, cat stuff. This was brought in from Arizona. They have this really thing for streaking on the front, and from that photo we showed earlier, really black barring on the back of the skin. So that's another one where videos really help with that bird. All right. So another habitat type I want to touch on briefly is grasslands. I really like grasslands. As a biologist, I do a lot of work with grasslands. What we have around here in southern Arizona is mostly Chihuahuan desert grassland. There is some other grassland types too you can encounter at higher elevations, but a lot of what you're going to see driving around southeast Arizona is Chihuahuan desert grassland. It has a beautiful monsoon green that happens right now. You go to Sonoyta and that area, all the grass is green, but the rest of the year, everything's yellow, like in this photo. And you get sparrows, we're going to talk about in a second, that are very associated with this monsoon summer abundance. But all that grass that grows and all the seeds that are produced during the summer, I just want to say briefly, are very important for wintering birds, such as chestnut-colored longspurs. This is one of the fastest declining birds in North America, and they winter down here in southeast Arizona. We do a lot of bird survey work and really monitoring of these critically declining birds, chestnut-colored longspurs. They're very cool. I do publish things about this occasionally in the Tucson Audubon magazines, and we do talk about it on our website. So if you're interested in learning more about chestnut-colored longspurs and the bird surveys we do, just keep in mind when you're seeing these beautiful areas around Sonoyta that are green right now, I revel in all this growing and seed producing that's happening now, because this will be important winter food for these migratory birds that winter here. Very cool. But in the summer, the iconic species are Bottery sparrow. This is a very interesting bird. They are mostly in Mexico. And when I looked it up, pretty much considered a Mexican sparrow that just has this extension of range that barely comes into southeast Arizona, pretty much the only place in the US. And they're mostly in desert grassland or Chihuahuan desert grassland, and they do sing this time of year, and this is what it sounds like. Has a bouncy ball quality, really cool bird, and if you go out into these grassland areas on a trip, you may well encounter them. Another really distinctive bird that's been really hard to find this year, I think because still a lingering effect from the drought that we were experiencing, is Cactus sparrow. They're a little more widespread throughout the US. They do go into Texas, and in certain years they'll go north of that. They are incredibly secretive. So you think they're gone for the winter, but they're actually resident, and they're just very quiet and really not making any noise or showing themselves. But they have these dramatic fluctuations in abundance and range. So them being largely absent from southeast Arizona at the moment will hopefully be a temporary thing. And they are known for that, known for abandoning an area when conditions are not great, and they were pretty bad this spring, and then returning when they're good. So hopefully, I can't wait to hear my next Cactus sparrow. I haven't heard one yet this year, but this is what they sound like. Right there. Very sweet song, very, very sweet, almost like a white-throated sparrow song. And they do this in the breeding season, which would normally be now the monsoon season. They do this skylarking thing where the males will flutter up and then flutter down like a skylark. It's very cool. Now, moving up in elevation, we do have our mountains, also known as Sky Islands here in southeast Arizona. Part of that Sierra Madre Occidental, the upper limits of that mountain chain, is in southeast Arizona. We spent a lot of time talking about it at the beginning, but it is such a huge influence, and it pulls species from Mexico into the US. And there's many layers of habitat, which is another important thing to keep in mind about Sky Islands, is they have this sort of, they go from low to high, which if you go, there's an ecological rule about that, where if you go from like the base of Mount Lemmon to the top of Mount Lemmon, it's the equivalent of going from the US-Mexico border up to the US-Canada border ecologically. So incredibly important diversity comes from just the different layers within a Sky Island. So at the bottom here, we're going to talk about chaparral and some thorn scrub species up into oak woodlands. Canyons are incredibly important in Sky Islands, especially for birds. And these tallest mountain ranges in southeast Arizona, like the tallest ones, like the Pinaleños and the Rincon Mountains, can have alpine meadows up at the peaks. So huge diversity just from the diversity of habitats within these areas. So five-striped sparrow, this is an absolute superstar of rare birds of southeast Arizona. One of, I think, the most desirable birds. If I had to pick top three, five-stripe would be in it. And semi-arid thorn scrub, and TDF is a term biologists throw around. It means tropical deciduous forest. And it's a very distinctive habitat type within Sierra Madre, larger ecological zones. These birds are monsoon nesters. That should be there. They're the rarest nesting sparrow in the US, and they're resident but very secretive outside of the breeding season. Very hard to find. And look at this range map. They barely make it into the US at all, and here in Southeast Arizona. Very cool. So I do have a video. All right, oops, okay. Because this is another one where I really feel like you have to just experience them. They're such cool birds. Ding ding. That's such a PE vocalization for them. Ding ding. So very cool birds. Oh, I gotta turn that off and keep going. Okay. So very cool birds, and really they have to be sort of experienced in person or in video because they're more dynamic than their photos. I think they're such really cool birds. Another key one here is buff-collared nightjar. These are often in very similar locations to five-striped sparrows because they're going for the similar kind of habitat. They really like semi-arid thorn scrub. Very specific habitat type with specific plant species associated with it that you only get in very specific geographical sort of, slopes within certain percentages. So very specific, and they're very rare. They're often near arid washes, so along sort of creeks that only flow when it rains. And there's probably fewer than 20 locations in the US that you can find them. And California Gulch is the best known of these locations, but they do show up sometimes in other areas. For a few years, there was some in the Proctor Road at the base of Madera Canyon. They're not there right now, as far as I know, but they do show up in areas, but their voice is so distinctive. Doesn't sound like much else out there. Really cool call that you'll sometimes hear in the dark in places like California Gulch. They do have, if you get a good look at one, they have this lovely buff color that they're named for. So very cool bird. Incredible, definitely a specialty bird of Southeast Arizona. Varied buntings is another one. Really cool, absolutely beautiful, charismatic species. They are a little more broad-minded than buff-collared nightjars, but not much. They really like arid thorn brush areas, especially near washes where they can get some of that water abundance. They're monsoon nesters. They do take their cues on when to nest from physical rainfall, when the rain actually falls. And their historic name of beautiful bunting is one of my favorite things about them, that was a name they had officially at some point. In a continent that has painted buntings in it, they were called beautiful bunting. So I think that is absolutely amazing. I have seen them come to feeder stations before, like in Santa Rita Lodge in Madera Canyon. Real pretty song, a little jumbly, hopping around. Kind of a thin song. There it is again. It's that very bunting. Very cool. And this is the time of year they're here. They're one of the latest birds to arrive. They're not really here in the spring. They come kind of early summer and stay through the monsoon. So Elegant Trogon is an absolute key species. Another, I'd say if I had to pick a top three, they'd be in the top three. There's a reason the logo behind me is Elegant Trogon for the festival. Very cool birds. And I cannot help but be totally charmed by them since I do coordinate the large scale Elegant Trogon survey of Southeast Arizona. And they are the most adaptable Trogon. So Trogons is a big family, large family. There's a lot of Trogon species through Mexico into Central and South America. But this is the only Trogon that regularly breeds in the United States, is Elegant Trogon. And it makes sense they'd be one of the most adaptable. And they're migratory in the US. Some do winter here, which is something we're investigating. They eat a lot of fruit, but they also feed a large number of insects to their young. And let's listen to their call. Beautiful bird with kind of a hoarse call, but they're very cool. They're very dynamic. And our bird survey of them, the Elegant Trogon survey that Tucson Audubon organizes, has been absolutely amazing to watch their numbers change throughout the year. And the effects of the recent drought were very apparent with them. And here is a video of them, a brief video showing their nesting behavior, which is kind of rare to see. Excuse the photographer clicking down. They are cavity nesters. They will nest with or naturally occurring. The female bringing prey. stunning birds. I really like elegant trogons, and they're absolutely an iconic bird of Southeast Arizona, especially Sky Island. So they're pretty restricted to Sky Island habitat near drainages. So where sycamores occur, or large oaks along canyons where they have creeks in them, or in places like the Patagonia Mountains where you have drainages, you can find elegant trogons in this time of year in the summer, with occasionally some that stay throughout the winter. So very cool birds. Rufous cap warbler is one that is very interesting as well. They are very cool. They are a warbler, but they don't really act like one. They have this habit of flicking their wings and cocking their tail that makes them come off more like small wrens. They're very interesting behavior-wise. There are spring nesters. They're colonizers in the sense that they'll sort of, a population will pop up in a good area of Southeast Arizona, places like Hunter Canyon or Florida Canyon in the Santa Rita Mountains. And they'll be there for a while. The population will grow as they have young successfully, and then something can happen. They do need reliable water and streams, and if that disappears, they can vanish from an area or go higher up towards the actual spring that's harder for humans to get to. But they're interesting birds, and they sort of kind of ebb and flow a bit. But the call is one of the most reliable ways to find them in the spring. You have to know that song and that call. So it's kind of steady, kind of a steady trill. They're really interesting song. They're very cool birds. A lot of very high on birders' lists. Montezuma quail is the other one I would put in the top 3 of the most wanted birds in Southeast Arizona. They're very cool, or even just in Arizona. They're very cryptic. You wouldn't think a bird with all these spots and stripes would be cryptic, but when you see them in the dappled shadows underneath oaks in the Sky Islands of Southeast Arizona, they're incredibly well hidden. So they're most often seen by flushing, when people are just walking through good habitat, and they will literally wait till you're like 6 inches from them, and then they'll fly up in your face and absolutely scare the bejesus out of you, and then they sort of take off. So I think they're more often seen that way than they ever are seen this way, posing nicely. But they're very cool. They have a distinctive song. They're monsoon nesters, and they do experience dramatic fluctuations in their population based on sort of drought, or hard freezes during the winter can sometimes take a toll on their populations. And I think we're in a low time right now. This drought had a serious effect on them. They are still around, but the numbers seemed far more abundant sort of last monsoon than they are this month. But the voice is incredibly distinctive. So the male speaker, slurring whistle song that's really pretty distinctive. And if you know to listen for it, that can help you find them. Whiskered screech owls is one that I think is underappreciated, but incredibly rare. So if you look at the map here, they are through, this is a pretty good outline of where the Sierra Madre Occidental mountain ranges are in West Mexico, coming through the entire Sierra Madre up into Southeast Arizona. So very, very closely tied to Sierra Madre oak woodland habitat, especially near creeks. It does look like a western screech owl, but notice the differences here in the bill, very pale bill, almost whitish bill, whereas the western has an almost black bill, and it has these very large feet, which is not the easiest thing to see sometimes on an owl, but their voice is incredibly different too. Pretty different from western screech owl, if you've ever heard one. It's definitely a sound in the spring if you camp in the canyons of Southeast Arizona, one that you will encounter. Arizona woodpecker, this is a great one, where I have heard it said it's North America's only brown woodpecker, but they're very cool and they're very range restricted. So oak woodland, especially near creeks, and has a distinctive sort of peak town they make. So here's the range here. You can see here that the range is just barely coming into Southeast Arizona. So incredibly range restricted, very much associated with Sierra Madre. And I had so many species. The Sky Islands are full of these amazing birds. So I had to do another sort of group photo, class photo here. So here's red-faced warbler, really nice, beautiful warbler that's restricted to sort of Sky Islands in Southeast Arizona. Painted redstarts, which are also in the warbler family. Canyon wren. So this is one that you can get in desert too, and really in drainages that have a lot of water, but I feel like I encounter them most in the drainages and canyons of the Sky Islands. So is canyon wren, Mexican jay, which if you're in the right habitat for them, this is the dominant jay that we have. They're pretty common in the right habitat, but incredibly restricted to Sierra Madre habitat within Southeast Arizona and Mexico. And then greater peewee, similar thing, very distinctive voice, but it's definitely not the most colorful bird in the Sky Islands, but they're really cool and they're incredibly range restricted to Southeast Arizona. And then of course, our charismatic and noisy acorn woodpecker. You can't go to the Santa Rita Lodge and not see acorn woodpeckers hanging out on the poles behind the feeder station. So incredibly charismatic Sky Island bird of Southeast Arizona. I do want to briefly mention that I do have sources for this material. So all the photos were from the Tucson Audubon Flickr pool or selected photographers with permission. All the audio recordings came from Arizona Field Ornithologists online audio library, which is really cool. I suggest you check it out if you want to hear, again, MP3s of some of the recordings I play. And all the range maps were from Birds of the World Online, which is from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And I am happy to take questions, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other again. Okay. So
all right,
let's see if there's any questions that were in the chat. I was not watching the chat.
Yeah, just a couple of questions so far. First, I just want to make an observation. The Arizona woodpecker, why is it called an Arizona woodpecker if it's only like teeny little bit? And
I know, should be the Mexico.
Kind of weird, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely strange. You can tell it was named by someone on the Arizona side of the border.
Obviously. So, and then we have, let's see, somebody asked, do different hawks have different cries? And yeah. I think they do.
It's difficult. It can be difficult to tell them apart because they're often in that real screamy range of tone, but they absolutely do have different cries that can be, if you're experienced enough, you can at least narrow it down and definitely kind of start to tell them apart. Greyhawk is pretty distinctive, but ones that blur together for me are like common blackhawk versus zone tail can sound pretty similar. Red tail is also pretty darn specific, but yeah, they do have different sounds.
So do you think a red tail and a greyhawk sound completely different?
Somewhat, yeah, they're similar in the sense that they're both sort of in that screaming zone of sound. But red tails do a longer call usually, and it's a bit higher pitched than greyhawk.
All right. Also, just a personal observation here. I chased an elegant trogon that was seen in Sonoyta in the grasslands.
Yes.
And I think I emailed you about this.
Yeah, this was amazing.
I'm like, okay, why is this thing down here instead of in the mountains where it belongs?
Right. So that's a good question, Tina. And this was such a strange year for trogons, for elegant trogons in southern Arizona, where we have just come out of a very serious drought. The trogons usually arrive late April and then will start nesting in May. They were acting so different this year because I'm sure the ones that did arrive looked around and saw just how little prey there was, how little insect food there was, just because it was an absolutely desperate drought. And I think they started moving all over the place, kind of looking to survive. I think they went into survival mode a bit. And they were showing up in very odd places like Sonoyta, the grassland habitat. Several showed up in urban Tucson. There was some in Bisbee, which is unprecedented. That's not usually where they are. But I think there was a lot of moving around, looking for opportunities, shifting around, trying to find food that was happening. Now that the rains have come, starting in July, we got much more monsoon rainfall this year than we've had the last year for sure, and even more than the previous years in recent times. And many trogons arrived late. Some seem to have arrived after the survey, once July hit and we got some rain. And a lot of them are nesting later than normal. So it feels like for this year, all bets are off. Like now they're mostly in areas you would expect them to be because the conditions are now what they would expect them to be. Full of food and full of plenty.
All right. Okay. I guess that makes plenty of sense. And then the stupid thing when I went down there, it wasn't. My nephew had it at his house, and I'm like, "That's
crazy.
This is
That's
my
really cool.
nemesis bird. My nemesis."
Yeah.
And I actually caught a teeny little glimpse of it when I went down there the next day, but
Well,
not
that's great.
anything.
Yeah, it was
spectacular.
definitely an odd year for sure. And there was a front page article done about this in
Yes.
July by the Arizona Daily Star. You can find it online, where I went into depth about what was going on with the population crash. But during our Trogon survey in May, we had 68 elegant Trogons we counted, and that's compared to 201 from the year before.
Yeah,
Now, I do think more Trogons arrived once the rain started in July, but it's hard to say for sure. And they were definitely responding to drought. I think it's very safe to say that.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions?
Yes, if anybody wants to unmute themselves,
Yeah, please.
ask any questions, please feel free to do that.
I love talking about birds.
I can't, I can't unmute people. You've got to unmute yourselves if you want to talk. So, and we're about at the end of our program anyway, so we probably want to have people unmute themselves and tell Jennie, thank you for giving us this presentation. I really, this was a really great presentation, Jennie. I appreciated it.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it. And I am happy to stay. If anyone has questions they'd like to ask in person, please, let's do it.
Yes, and I want to thank all you participants as well. So thank you all for joining us.
Jennie, I have a question for you. Yeah. You showed the picture of the Western screech owl and mentioned the whiskered Western screech owl. And I was convinced about a month ago that one showed up on my front porch on a very hot day and was hiding in a corner. And I knew nothing about the whiskered Western, but I got a picture of it. And then when I processed that picture, it was kind of dark. The whiskers clearly showed up. But when I put it up on eBird, I got an email from an expert, much more so than myself, who suggested there's never been one seen north of Casa Grande. So it's no way that, because I live just at the very northern edge of the Phoenix metro, and he said couldn't have been there. So it's sort of, what my question is, does the Western also have whiskers or bristles?
They do. They do.
Okay.
Now, it's one of those things where it's kind of a poorly named bird, like so many birds. They're naming it after a feature that is not a great feature to tell them apart. So Western screech owl is far more widespread throughout the American West. You can get them in Sonoran Desert, up into sort of foothills of mountains. They're pretty widely spread. Owl, much more common than the whiskered screech owl. So Western screech owl does also have bristles, does have whiskers. They do, but the bill is a different color, which is why I pointed that out. And their voices are pretty different. And up that far north, I would expect it to be Western screech owl as well.
Okay, that answers my question.
That's another thing too. They like to hang out on people's homes, and I feel like whiskered screech owls do that kind of thing a lot less. Even people who live up in Sky Islands, you don't see whiskers that much coming into man-made nest boxes or anything like that, like you do with Western. The whiskered seem a little more kind of like wild in a sense. They like to nest in tree cavities away from people.
Well, that's great. And I just want to also say what a super presentation you've just made. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions?
Anybody else have any questions that they want to ask?
I see someone says here, thinking about staying because of the birds, that I've only lived here 4 or 5 weeks in Tucson. Yes, you should. Birding's great here all year round.
Yes. Doesn't matter what time of year
I
it
should
is.
be a spokesperson for Tucson. Yes, it's definitely a good spot. I feel very lucky that my family landed here, that we ended up here in Tucson. No one in my family is a birder at all but me, but boy, did I end up in such a good spot.
So with a question about the YouTube channel. Now, I think they're going to try and post all of these on the YouTube channel, but there will definitely be the recording, which has I've been recording it, will be sent out to everyone who is registered for this class, whether you attended it or not, but not probably until Monday or Tuesday next week because of the festival and everybody being busy because of the festival. So you will get a link to this recording eventually. And I think that they said they were going to try and post all of these virtual festival presentations onto the YouTube channel as well. So
we've been putting nearly everything up on YouTube. So I imagine this will be the same, but there will be a bit of a lag because
yes, definitely
the week of the festival.
So, okay, if anybody, no other questions, I guess we'll go ahead and end here. And thank you, everybody, for attending. And thanks, Jenny,
Thank you.
for your presentation, which as usual is great. And I will see, Jenny, I will see you later this afternoon. And we will be ending now.
Thank
Thank you all so much.
Thank you,
everybody.
Jenny.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
End.